Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning. After a difficult year of revolving closures, online struggles, and disrupted learning, our kids need a real education recovery that makes sure that none of them falls between the cracks. And that means providing students with mental health supports, special education supports, and more individual attention. It means making sure that in-person learning is here to stay and that education workers are supported. The COVID-19 Science Advisory Table, the scientists who advised the Ontario government on the pandemic, just a few weeks ago, they published a report on the impact of education disruption. And to me, this was a fire alarm going off, and everybody needs to pay attention. For example, one economic study estimated potential losses in Canada at $1.6 trillion over the lifetime of today's students. The science table also said that the education disruption and lifetime cost will be greater for low-income, disabled, Indigenous, and racialized kids. So what's clear is that inequality will worsen and economic losses could be enormous if we don't repair the damage. And that's why we must invest seriously in a real education recovery now. This is essential for a strong, inclusive economy for decades to come. And so I'm excited to welcome the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, Stephen Del Duca, to discuss our response, our education recovery plan. Stephen, pass it on to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Ted, for inviting me to Kingston and the Islands, of course, virtually at this point in time, and for your opening remarks, which frankly hit the nail right on the head with the challenge and the opportunity that sits here in front of the people of Ontario at this critically important moment in the journey through this pandemic, a pandemic ordeal that's been brutally tough on everybody in every corner of this province, including in Kingston and the Islands, an ordeal that we all hope we are much closer to the end of. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but the critically important thing now for all of us is how do we build a new normal that actually provides for people in this province the way that they need to be provided for, that gives them that real deal, that real fair shake, that real opportunity to go forward in life and to be set up for success. And one of the most profoundly important ways to deliver on that kind of opportunity for everybody, regardless of where they live or what their personal circumstances are, is to build a world-class publicly funded education system. Now, we all know, again, both in Kingston, my home community of Vaughan, and right across Ontario, that prior to the pandemic, publicly funded education had been undermined very badly by Doug Ford and the current government. We know that during the pandemic, they took a really tough situation, a situation that was always going to be difficult for students, parents, teachers, and everyone else in education, just by virtue of the nature of the pandemic. They took a tough situation and made it dramatically worse because they haven't engaged in genuine partnership, genuine consultation, because they haven't provided funding, because they haven't been consistent and clear and decisive in their messaging throughout this pandemic. And so moms and dads across Ontario, including myself and my wife, and so many others, because our daughters are in grade 8 and grade 4 here in York Region in a publicly funded school, we've all had to endure this whipsaw effect for the entire school year, schools opening, schools closing, a ton of anxiety that has not been good for anybody in the system. And frankly, I don't want to see a repeat of this for my kids or for Ontario's kids ever again. And so we have to work hard, dig down deep, and come up with a thoughtful plan that will provide us with a real recovery for publicly funded education. And I'm really proud of the work that Ted, you, and the rest of our team have done to put together the Ontario Liberal Plan for Education Recovery. It's a plan that I believe will give moms and dads the peace of mind that they need, that will set our kids up for success, and that will motivate everybody who works on the front lines of education: principals, caretakers, school bus drivers, teachers, early childhood educators, admin staff, everybody who works in that ecosystem. It will set everyone up for success because they will feel valued, they will feel respected, and they will be motivated to help our kids achieve, again, that true success. So there are a couple of key things or key highlights that I'd like to talk about today in the Ontario Liberal Plan before we open it up for questions. Number one, we are just a couple of days away from the end of the school year. Again, a school year that has been so tough and so debilitating for so many kids across this province. To me, there is no better antidote for what kids have had to go through this past year than providing every child in Ontario with the opportunity to get back into a space where they can have fun, where they can be out in the fresh air, where they can see their friends, where they can socialize, and just experience what it means to be a kid all over again after everything they've gone through. And to me, that means summer camps, summer programming, recreational programs that we have in places like Kingston and the Islands and beyond. But we know, as Ted pointed out about the importance of inclusiveness, we know that there are thousands and thousands of families in every corner of Ontario that wouldn't otherwise have access or be able to afford to send their kids off to a summer camp or some other local recreational program, again, to let this be a summer of fun for their kids. And so the Ontario Liberal Plan for Education Recovery has set aside a significant investment of $100 million that will provide supports and make it more accessible and more affordable for low and moderately income families to actually be able to access that summer of fun for their kids, to give the kids the chance to be normal again, to be around their friends again, and prepare for September in the best way possible. Secondly, and I talked about consultation just a couple of seconds ago, we have seen throughout this pandemic that there has never been a genuine attempt or effort made by Doug Ford or his team to have an ongoing conversation with the partners that we have in Ontario's education system. And to me, that's a real missed opportunity. It's a lack of leadership and it's a real missed opportunity. I've had the chance over the past year and a bit to have now about 7 different Zoom conversations with 40 or 50 or 60 different partners from every aspect of publicly funded education province-wide. And here's what I've learned. While they haven't always agreed with one another, there's been a remarkable level of consensus about their desire to help, their desire to provide advice and give guidance to the government, or in this case, an opposition party, and I'm sure to all opposition parties, about what would work on the front lines of education. And so while we can't press rewind and go backwards in life, Doug Ford right now, today, this week, needs to give the instructions to his minister, and he himself needs to engage in that genuine, authentic consultation all the way through to get the best possible advice, again, to set our kids up for success. Class sizes are such an important foundational element of how we set our kids up for success and create that resilient, world-class, publicly funded education system that everybody in this province wants. So in the Ontario Liberal Plan for Education Recovery, we call for a hard cap of 20 of class sizes right across the board. That will give those children in this province, many of whom, thousands of whom, are likely suffering from significant learning gaps because of the nature of how tough the pandemic has been on them. That'll give them the chance to be assessed properly and to get the kind of in-person direct instruction from their teacher and from the other support staff in their school environment. So again, they can go forward, achieve, catch up, and feel comfortable in the school setting. So a class size capped, a hard cap at 20. Ted mentioned in his opening remarks about the need for supports for kids with special needs and mental health challenges. The Ontario Liberal Plan for Recovery and Education sets aside, again, a significant investment. We're calling for 5,000 new special education professionals. That is more than 1 additional special education professional per school in Ontario to help those children who need that extra help get the help that they need. Because, of course, we're not doing well as a province. We're not doing well in our school system unless we're all given that chance to perform and to excel. Mental health, we're calling for 1,000 mental health professionals to be brought on stream to provide support, because we know how grueling and how devastatingly difficult on the mental health side this pandemic has been for everyone. A couple of other things I want to highlight. I've heard this from Ted. I've heard this from our candidates around Ontario. We've heard from advocates in the education space, including the organization Fix Our Schools. We know that right now in Ontario, there are far too many schools that are not in a good state of repair. And during a pandemic, during a health crisis, the notion of air quality and ventilation quality has been a really big deal for moms and dads in terms of the peace of mind that we should all have in terms of sending our kids to school. And so our plan calls for an investment at the provincial level that would match the $500+ million that's already been invested by the federal government to make sure we have top-notch ventilation, top-notch air quality within our schools. Again, so important when you're dealing with something like a health crisis, especially when you should want to give moms and dads, students, teachers, and everyone else working in education that peace of mind. And lastly, I just want to talk about this notion of in-person learning versus virtual learning. I will tell you, having witnessed this firsthand with my own daughters this school year, I'm here to tell you that nothing will ever substitute or be better than in-person learning when our children are healthy and safe in a building that is physically healthy and safe, when they're being taught and when they're being supported and helped by motivated individuals who are respected and honored on those front lines in education. This notion at a philosophical level that Doug Ford has come up with, whereby he wants to see an ongoing parallel virtual publicly funded system, is just not on for me. It's not on for me as a dad. It's not on for me as someone who's running to be your next premier. I think it's a mistake. I think it's a way to cut costs rather than actually achieve success for our kids. And I think that's really bad economic policy, and it's horrifically bad education policy. Having said all of that, I know Ontario Liberals know that there will be moms and dads and there will be students who for this coming September continue to have concerns and anxieties about whether it's safe to go back in person. And they'll feel that way, I suspect, because we know kids under the age of 12 do not yet have access to vaccines. And we know that there might be some other challenges that individual families and students are facing. We get it. That's why in the Ontario Liberal Plan for Education Recovery, we've included a time-limited option for the balance of this coming school year while we are still dealing with this pandemic. For those parents who want to keep their kids at home learning virtually, we're giving them we would propose to give them the option to do so. But again, it's time limited. It's not creating a parallel system. It's not undermining the excellence that we need to come from our education system. So these are some of the highlights in the Ontario Liberal Plan. It's comprehensive, it is thoughtful, it is responsible. It will set Ontario's families up for success. It's good for our kids. It's really good for our economy, as Ted said a second ago. It's good for all of us. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, just a reminder to the reporters on the line, if you could please write to the chat with your full name and your outlet name, I will call on you for a question. And the first question is Michelle Dory-Forstel from the Kingstonist.
There we go. Sorry about that. There's an unmute problem. How are you doing? And I wanted to ask, specifically, you mentioned the hard cap of 20. Is that across the board for all grades, primary, junior, intermediate, and senior?
Yes, it would be a hard cap across the board.
That's amazing. Great. And do you think that the Minister of Education position, should you become the new leader, would that be somebody that has an actual background in education?
Well, look, I'm not in any position right now to talk about should we earn the honor of governing Ontario, who might serve in certain roles. That's not my focus right now. It's not our focus right now. Our focus is on, first of all, holding Doug Ford to account for the really bad decisions he continues to make. Secondly, it's about putting a positive, forward-looking roadmap in front of the people of Kingston and the Islands and the people of Ontario about the kind of Ontario that we want to build together with everyone. And I happen to believe, both as a dad and as a political leader, that there are profoundly important responsibilities that a premier of our province has. Number one is publicly funded education, and number two is universal public health care. I think there have been really, really reckless and bad decisions made in both spaces by Doug Ford and his team. And I can tell you, when I look at my candidates, the candidates that are running for the Ontario Liberal Party, like Ted Hsu, someone with remarkable integrity and a great track record of serving his community and serving with distinction, I have no doubt that we have the talent and we have the plan to move Ontario forward.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'm done with my questions, am I? I'm allowed to ask one more?
Sure, go for it. What the heck?
Okay, thank you.
Hope I don't get in trouble.
No, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to double check. So then a Liberal government would accept that teachers are by definition experts in education and work with them? Because I know just from experience as a mom and happening to be a wife of a teacher, Mr. Lecce and Mr. Ford have been hostile to teachers right from the get-go out of the pandemic, and they've been framing any input from educators as union bickering. And I just wondered how you felt about that, and where would you go with that if you were to become leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. So look, I think the way that Doug Ford's approached publicly funded education, the way that he has undermined and disrespected the women and men who do work on the front lines, yes, teachers, but also custodians, school bus drivers, principals, trustees, everybody, like the entire publicly funded education ecosystem has been completely disrespected and downgraded and undermined by Doug Ford. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. I think there's something, I think at a philosophical level that Doug Ford has made quite clear he doesn't support or value publicly funded education. And I disagree with him on that. I do value it, and I value the women and men who work heroically on the front lines. I want every single educator, and I want every other person working in publicly funded education to feel valued and feel respected and be motivated to pursue their life's work, their vocation, in the way that they want to, which is to set our kids up for success. That's what I want to see in my daughter's classroom, and it's what I want to see in classrooms in every corner of Ontario.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question is Adrian Gabriel from City News.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Question, a lot of parents, their immediate focus is on September and getting the kids back and keeping them back when it comes to in-person learning. Does your party believe that when schools go back in September, would you be open to taking some other things off the board, whether it be, let's say, in-person dining is an option in September? Would you be into, rolling back some of the other steps that we've taken, public health, economic steps that we've taken to ensure that students stay in school in September and October and November?
So it was hard for me to hear part of the question, so I'm not quite, if you want to repeat maybe
Sure.
the key points so I can hear it again.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
When it comes to September and kids going back, parents are focused on their kids staying in school.
Right.
Would you and your party be open to rolling back some of the other, let's say, restaurants, in-person dining, inside dining is open in September.
Right.
Would you be open to, closing off parts of the economy again to ensure that students stay in class?
I got it. Okay. Now I heard it clearly. Thanks very much for the question. So here's what I would say about that. Look, we've heard from the Science Table and others throughout the pandemic that Ontario schools should be the last to close and the first to open. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the way that it's unfolded here in Ontario in terms of school closures has been worse than any other part of the country, certainly worse than what we saw take place in the province of Quebec just next door. And I think every single mom and dad in this province, even those of us who have have had a lot of anxiety about the health and safety of our kids, would also recognize that the social isolation, kids falling out of the system because we're not quite sure that if they really are tuned in, if they really are logged on, all of that is going to have and has already had a devastating impact on kids in terms of their learning gaps, in terms of their mental health, in terms of their ability to socialize and again, excel and be set up for success. And so I am very, very hopeful when you look at the vaccination rates that we see in the Kingston area and right across Ontario, that by the time we get to the end of this summer, that every single Ontarian 12 years of age and older will have had access to both doses of the vaccine. If we get there, and if we continue to exceed the benchmarks, then I don't think we're going to have to make the choice that you suggested in your question. But I would say again, there are to me two profoundly important responsibilities a premier has. One is publicly funded education. The other is universal public health care. I think Doug Ford has moved us backwards in both of those critically important areas. Our plan, I believe, sets our kids up for success and will help create that resilient and strong publicly funded education system, not just for September, but for many months and in fact, years to come.
Follow-up?
Thanks for that. When it comes to the hard cap of 20 students per class, it sounds great. Saying it in an election year is one thing, doing it is another. Can you shed any more light on how you would bring the cap across the province to 20? How many more teachers would we need? How much more is this going to cost? Like, what are the realities here?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a great point. Now, here's the interesting thing from my perspective. Some of you on the call today might remember that last summer of 2020, Ontario Liberals released a plan that would have set us up, I think, for better success in schools in September of 2020. And at that point, we called for a hard cap of 15 across the board. Now, at that stage of the pandemic, we came up with the number 15 because it was a lot more important for us to maintain, from our perspective, for kids to be physically distant based on the science tables advice and in pediatric advice, the pediatric medicine or medical advice that was being provided at that point in time. We're obviously at a different phase of the pandemic with, as I mentioned, the vaccine rollout being where it is. It's one of the reasons I feel more comfortable. We feel more comfortable saying we can have class sizes go to 20 because the physical distancing is not quite as critical today as it was a year ago. But on the learning side, we know that when class sizes are smaller and students, in particular those who will have learning gaps, in particular those who do have special needs, get more direct interaction and instruction from their teachers, from the other support staff that work in our classrooms, they're actually better positioned to make up or catch up, and then again to excel. There will be, in order to get there right across the board, there would be a requirement to hire thousands of teachers. The total number between elementary and secondary is just under 10,000 province-wide. Here's what we know in the province of Ontario today. There are about 85,000 women and men who are certified to be teachers in Ontario who are not currently working in publicly funded schools. Some of them might be working in private schools, but I suspect that thousands and thousands of others have left the profession over the last 3 years because, frankly, they are exhausted and they're fed up with being treated like a doormat by Premier Ford and the rest of his team. When you've got a premier in charge who doesn't value publicly funded education, who denigrates the women and men on the front lines on a regular basis and clearly doesn't respect the profession, it's normal that you're going to have people leave the profession. I want those people those women and men who are motivated, who really believe in the value of publicly funded education to come back into the system. So in our plan that we're talking about here today, there are specific details around how we would recruit, bring back into the system the teachers that we know exist there. There are lots of different mechanisms at a provincial government's disposal, but here's the fundamentally important thing. In order to deliver a class size cap of 20, you have to want to do it. You have to value publicly funded education. You have to say, if you're the premier, and this is what I'd be doing if I had the honor of governing this province, this is one of those all hands on deck moments. This is one of those situations, those issues where I'm prepared to throw everything at the wall in a good way, in an effective way, to deliver on the outcome, again, that will set our kids up for success. I am quite convinced, having watched Doug Ford perform in this area over the last 3 years, he doesn't have the interest to make the effort or the investment to get it right. But Ontario Liberals, should we earn the opportunity to govern next year, definitely will.
Okay, the next question is from Steve Paikin from TVO.
Morning, Stephen. Morning, Ted.
Morning.
This is an education question, but it's about post-secondary.
Okay.
I'm wondering if, Stephen, you have a view as to whether or not Ryerson University needs to change its name.
Obviously, I've been following the discussion really closely, and I've had the chance to have one conversation with the president of Ryerson. That conversation predated the tragic and horrific discovery of the 215 kids who were killed, who lost their lives at the Kamloops Residential School. So I haven't had a direct conversation with the president since that news came out. I think there's a lot of room here for a thoughtful and responsible discussion about whether or not that university should be renamed, whether or not there are other instances where the way that we showcase historical figures takes into account the whole story of their record. And there are a lot of Ontarians who I think want to see a thoughtful and responsible discussion. So we're going to, I would advise or recommend that everyone engage in that kind of, again, thoughtful and responsible discussion to get to a good place on this. And I look forward to participating in that kind of discussion. Having said all of that, I will tell you, when it comes to Indigenous reconciliation here in the province of Ontario, and frankly, right across Canada, we have so much more work that needs to be done. I've said this on the record over the last few weeks. There are a couple of relatively straightforward things Doug Ford could be doing right now. In fact, he could have done one last week when he shuffled his cabinet. I've already said on the record that if I become premier next year, I will appoint a standalone minister responsible for Indigenous reconciliation and Indigenous affairs. And, like we had when we were last in power, I think that's something Doug Ford should have done last week when he did his cabinet shuffle. He failed to do so. We've talked in the past about the importance of making sure, and we're talking about education today, that the Ontario curriculum takes into account the entire story of Canada's history, including what took place in residential schools, including issues that have come to light as a result of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. We have a lot of work to do to heal the wound that is fundamental. It exists in this country. I love my country. I love my province, but we have so much more work still to do in this area. And I want us to do it thoughtfully and responsibly.
Okay, as a follow-up, I appreciate a thoughtful and responsible discussion needs to happen, but I want to make sure I characterize your position properly. You are open to a name change? You would advocate a name change? You are, just help me a bit on that if you could.
Yeah, look, I've seen arguments on both sides. We've seen this with respect to statues in the Kingston area and elsewhere across this province. I think, again, Ontarians are a fair-minded and responsible people, and I think they want to have a thoughtful discussion about how we can honor the achievements of the women and men who've come before us, but tell the full story about what exists within their records, the good, the bad, the good and the bad and the ugly, in the interests of making sure that we don't make the same tragic mistakes all over again. So I want to see a thoughtful discussion, a responsible discussion. I want us to work really hard in a tangible way on Indigenous reconciliation. To me, that's again, I just described it as a festering wound that still exists in this province, in this country. We have to get our hands around that and deal with it. And I think if we do that and we engage in a thoughtful and responsible discussion relating to renamings of institutions or statues being removed, I think we'll find a path forward that actually helps engender the reconciliation that I believe all Ontarians want with our Indigenous people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, the next question is Darren Davis from Global News Kingston.
Morning. I'm hoping to direct my question to Ted,
Right.
seeing as we sit in the same backyard together. Ted, obviously, the election isn't this summer, and parents are focused on, what's going to be happening this fall. What do you think needs to happen to ensure that bums can stay in seats in those classrooms? And do you think this should be a province-wide approach, or depending on whether there are outbreaks, should it be a regional approach to keeping students in classrooms or when deciding to take them out?
Sure. Okay, yeah, thanks, Darren, for the question. I mean, first of all, let me just say that the urgency of doing something to make sure that we have this education recovery, that we repair the damage, that is certainly province-wide, and actually it's worldwide where we have to deal with that problem. It's an enormous problem. But I think what your question is, let's say that we look at just Kingston. And I really do believe that risks are lower in Kingston, that we're safer in Kingston. People are not going to travel to Kingston to go to school. And I really think that if the local public health official says, you can open schools in Kingston, you can do this, you can do that, to make sure that we have a good education recovery, I think we should do that in Kingston. And as you know, Dr. Kieran Moore and the board of the Frontenac Lennox Public Health, they said okay to reopening the schools before the end of this school year. Unfortunately, that was overruled on a provincial level, but the local public health authorities and Dr. Kieran Moore, who's now our provincial chief medical officer of health, did say, we think that Kingston is safe enough and reopening schools is important enough that we could have done that before the end of the year.
Follow up?
No, I'm fine on follow up. It seems, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with Zoom. Ted was stuck up in the corner there, and it was full screen with Leader Del Duca. So,
oh, I could redo that again, Darren, if you want to take.
I would certainly love to have you redo that again, Ted. I'm just not sure why I've got it on speaker view, and I'm not. There you go. Now you
okay, there we go.
All right. Yeah. Sorry about that, Ted.
Okay, let me start over again. And so let me say that the urgency of this education recovery, of the government taking the lead and making taking all the necessary steps so that we have an education recovery, that is a province-wide imperative. In fact, the whole world is working on that because it's so serious. But I think your question is about locally here in Kingston. Can we do more? Can we go a little bit ahead of the curve, because we know that Kingston's a bit safer than other parts of the province. And I know that the local public health authorities, Dr. Kieran Moore and the board of the Frontenac Livingston Addington Public Health, have endorsed, they actually endorsed opening schools before the end of this year, knowing that Kingston was safer than other parts of the province. So I do believe that in the fall, if we need to make sure that students can resume in-person learning, we should definitely look at Kingston by itself if it can't be done across the province for some, maybe a new variant arises or something. But if Kingston is safer and the local public health authorities have said, like they said before the end of this school year, that we could reopen, we could enhance activities for in-person learning, we should definitely do it.
That one worked. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem, Darren.
Okay, moving on to the next question. I see there's no other questions on the line, but that Steve Bacon would like to come back into the queue to ask Ted a question. Ted, I'm going to leave you spotlight for this.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Will. Ted, just wondering what your view is on Kingston City Council's decision to move the Sir John A. statue out of the park and into the cemetery.
Steve, I think that all of the city councilors have received a lot of correspondence on both sides of the issue. And so they've had a chance to really think hard. And it seems to me that the community has had this fulsome discussion about doing it. So I support city council's decision. I think the important thing, and I agree with Stephen Del Duca, the important thing is to really have as many people as possible think hard about this question of how we are remembering Sir John A. So if anybody watching doesn't know, Kingston is Sir John A's home. There are so many things named after Sir John A. and so many historical markers in the city that I think it's important for Kingston to lead this discussion in the country about how to remember his legacy.
All right, as a follow-up then, what do you think moving his statue to the cemetery out of the park does to either help or not help remember his legacy?
I think the problem with this statue, I don't know if you've seen the statue. You have seen the statue in person, Steve, because you've come to Kingston and with Arthur Milnes and his historical tour. It's a very large statue, and I think the feeling that it gives of grandeur and glory is not the complete picture of it's not the picture that we want to leave people with when they think about Sir John A. It's a complicated story. It's an important story for the history of Canada, but it's complicated. And it just didn't seem right. And I think council's right to say it doesn't seem right given the whole story of Sir John A's legacy.
Thank you.
Okay, and I see that Michelle Dory-Forstel from the Kingstonists has come back into the queue. Michelle, I'm not sure if you're able to unmute.
Sorry about that. That explains a lot. Okay. My question's for Ted. So I just wondered if you had a chance. I've been working a lot with on the stories about the statue and with the group that is making recommendations to council about the removal of the statue on behalf of the Indigenous peoples. And I just wondered if you have had a chance, or if you knew about the commemorative art project that's at Lake Ontario Park. It's a beautiful installation commemorating the Alderville First Nations. And I just think it's very strange that there hasn't been more information out in the public sphere. I've done 2 stories on it now, but I really don't see a lot of coverage about it. And it's very ironic because it was just opened on National Indigenous Day on Monday, with the statue being taken down on last Thursday or Friday, it's a very ironic timing, but it's been in the works for 8 years now between the city and the Alderville First Nation. I just wondered if you'd had a chance to look at that, or if you would have a thought about promoting it better, or something to that effect.
I don't have a thought about promoting it better. I think that would be a city thing. And I did see the notice about it, but I haven't had a chance to go look at it. I'm hoping to have some chance in the next few days. But
Okay, yeah, no problem. I just wondered if you even knew about it, because I was shocked to find out that several of the other community members had never heard about the project, and it's been ongoing now for 8 years. COVID has kind of taken the wind out of the sails of that, but I hope you do get a chance to go and look at it. It's quite beautiful. Thank you. That's all I wondered.
Okay, there are no other questions on the line. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.